Okay, let's talk about the engine in my 1967 Lotus Europa Series 1. It's the original spec engine. It's actually the original block, and it's a Renault non-cross-flow 1600cc engine. The engine is rebuilt to full race specs. It's got a 12.5 to 1 compression ratio, 135 horsepower at the flywheel, 120 foot-pounds of torque. It's got an aluminum valve cover, as you can see. Underneath that valve cover is some interesting things. It's got a special set of machine stanchions that hold the valve gear in place, so it's much more strong and stable than the standard equipment, and the stanchions are held down by the head bolts. Everything's ARP hardware, by the way. Here you can see the intake side and the exhaust both on the same side. The intake is a 45 DCOE Weber carburetor. It's a made in Italy carburetor, isn't a later one, and a Hermes period correct manifold for this engine. It has you can't really see it, but down in there is a gear reduction starter, 4-into-1 headers. I'll take a look at the headers here, all the way out the back. The headers were developed by Pete Wimberly, who was a racer of Lotus Europas in the late 60s. And he developed the header, he developed the valve cover, the valve train stabilization stuff. In fact, these parts are off of his car that raced in Cal Club in 1967-68. The transaxle is a 4-speed Renault transaxle, but it is also based on some modifications that were done a long time ago. This transaxle has straight cut gears, ultra close ratio. The gear sets were developed to fit in a Renault transaxle by a guy named Gary Rodriguez, who raced the Lotus Europa in the 70s and went to the Nationals with his, and so that's where the gears come from. The ignition side of the engine is pretty standard. It's got Ducellier ignition distributor and Pertronix ignition, normal spark plugs and all that stuff. You can see the plumbing. The train is going by. You can see the plumbing for the oil cooler. The oil filter is a spin-on adapter that takes the oil out of the engine, goes through a cooler that's back here in the back of the car, comes forward again to the Canton Mecca oil filter, and then back into the engine. Another thing that we've had problems with that we have a solution for here is the engine had some foaming at high revolutions, and it was causing excessive cam wear because the oil wasn't doing its job. So what we ended up doing was the cam actually runs right here, right underneath the head, and you can see these manifolds. It's a kind of a air-equipped set of lines that go from the inlet for the original mechanical fuel pump across to a couple of places on the camshaft well. The reason for those is to get the oil out of the camshaft well more quickly down into the sump, so that you wouldn't have frothing in the camshaft well, and with the subsequent lack of proper lubrication. It has an 8-quart, 7.5, 8-quart sump, full depth sump with trapdoors and that kind of stuff. Single wire alternator, a very simple wiring harness. Here's the facet oil pump, the Fram filter, and the oil pressure fuel pressure regulator and gauge. There's a Lucas sport coil in here. All the hoses are silicone. You can see the hoses here for the back of the engine. There's more in the front and more up front in the car. Breather system you can see with a Moroso catch tank and breather, and there's a catch tank over here for water. The clutch is a 3-puck Kevlar clutch with a standard flywheel, standard clutch cover, and a Lighten flywheel. It's a Fidanza flywheel. So that gives you an overview. As I said, 135 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, 12.5 to 1 compression ratio. Runs perfectly fine as long as you have 105, at least 110 octane fuel with the compression ratio that it has. The engine was most recently rebuilt in 2016, and I have raced the car only 8 times since then. The engine builder is a guy named Terry Tinney, Performance Motors in Livermore, California, and he has rebuilt the engine 2 times for me. The first rebuild lasted 36 events before I decided to get it rebuilt again in 2016, and it again has about 8 events on it since then. So it's been very robust, good performance, and very reliable setup.